Hi everybody and welcome to GeekTube Central and our new Game of Thrones history series. Now we'll be covering the prehistory of Westeros and all the stuff that happened before Season 1. The Dawn Age of Westeros. Now, when we were first introduced to Westeros and drawn in, Robert Baratheon was the king on the Iron Throne. Now, it wasn't always so, and there was a pretty fairly recent history to do with the last 300 years that was brought up in the show, all about how Robert was the usurper of the Targaryen line, and that's what happened in the Robert's Rebellion. We want to go back further. We want to go back to the start of the known history of Game of Thrones, and this is the first era, the Dawn Age, which is significant for learning about the children of the forest and how they were affected by the arrival of the first men. As you can see, Westeros is a very big continent, right? Now, in the Dawn Age, there was only two races, and none of them were human. So we're talking about 13,000 years ago, the children of the forest and the giants. First, let's look at the giants. Now, as the name suggests, they're big, but they're not massively big. They're about 12 to 14 feet in height, basically twice the size of your average human. And they kind of resemble what we describe as Sasquatch or a Yeti, you know? They don't wear traditional clothing. They're covered in like this shaggy fur pelt, and it's quite thick from the waist down. Now, it's actually attached to their skin, and apparently as they become older, it turns grey and streaks with white. Now, they have humanoid features, but as you can see, they're kind of like what we imagine what Cro-Magnon man kind of had. They don't really have great eyesight, but they have a really good smelling ability. They're not very intelligent. They're not even intelligent as your average human, although they are able to learn speech. But because they live in the north, they haven't really encountered language. They basically are Stone Age kind of technology. They don't make or wear their own clothing because they're quite well protected by their fur, and they tend to use more things that are easy to hand, like a big tree log as a club, or using rocks and boulders to make basically crude mauling type weapons. They've even been able to form basic stone axes, but their brute strength is their main weapon, and for steeds they ride mammoths. They don't have kings or any type of political structure, if any. However, in their species, with all their strength, I suppose they revere that. So the older, larger and stronger giants are looked upon slightly differently in that they are seen as like warband leaders or chieftains.
The first men called us the children, but we were born long before them.
Now, because the Dawn Age is the first period of history in Westeros, it really has been watered down and reduced to basically like a legend, because any information that the people of Westeros have about the Children of the Forest is told orally, much like the human tradition where it was told from person to person. But over the years, as it's been translated and transmitted to people, it's been reduced down to the form of folk tales, ballads and songs. But what do we know about the children in their own true tongue that only they can speak? They call themselves those who sing the song of the earth. Physically, they have nutty brown skin with a spotted pattern much like a deer. They have large pointed ears. They have yellow cat-like eyes, but there are some with green or red eyes, and these children had the green sight and were known as green seers. And they have 3 fingers and 1 thumb, dark black claws rather than nails. And the reason why they're called the children by the first men is because at their maturity, they are no bigger than a child. Although slight in stature, they were very quick and graceful in how they moved. They were also very skilled in magic, which we'll discuss just shortly, and their ability to wield weapons that were made out of wood, bone and dragon glass. More specifically, weirwood tree wood that they used to make bows, and they used the obsidian or dragon glass to make arrowheads and daggers. As you see from this visual representation from the show of the children, they don't wear garments made of cloth. They didn't make their own clothes that way, but instead they used what they had from the forest. They interwove vines and leaves to make clothing to cover their torso and their legs, and they also used tree bark as bindings for their legs. They very much used what they had on hand. As explained earlier, the children of the forest have magical abilities, but within that there's the ability to skin change. Not all can do it, but those that can enter the mind of an animal and control its actions. They can even do this whilst asleep, which we see in the show later on. And also, a very specific brand of skin changing is to warg, or warging. And that is where the skin changer can go into the mind of a dog or a wolf. It's much harder to do so. They're very independent and they're hard to tame. Within the children of the forest, the greatest skin changers were also greenseers. Although you can be a skin changer and a greenseer, it's said that the best of the skin changer could go into any beast. It is also said 1 in 1,000 is born a skin changer, and 1 skin changer in 1,000 could be a greenseer. Now, apart from the skin changers, there was also the greenseers. Now, they were the wise men of the children of the forest, and they had magical abilities and power over nature and beast because they could skin change and warg. But they also had prophetic dreams known as green dreams that enabled them to see the past, the present, and the future. It was also compounded by the fact that they were the ones that carved the faces into the weirwood trees. Now, this was important because it was believed that the greenseers could see through the eyes of the carved faces, and that was another facet of their powers. And like I said, they could skin change, and usually the best skin changers were the greenseers, and obviously the best skin changers can also warg. Now that we've seen what the children of the forest look like and how they were described and what they did, let's look more closely at them by looking at their culture. The children preferred to live in the deep forest. It's here where they built hidden villages in the trees so that they could blend in with the landscape. But they also lived in crannogs, in swamps, and in caves. It is their choice of dwelling that directly relates to what they worship, and what they worship is the old gods, the nature gods. The children believed that there were spirits, countless and nameless spirits, in every rock, in every tree, and every stream. This was what they devoted themselves to. This is what they believed the old gods of the forest were. They didn't have temples, but according to legend, it was the children that carved the faces into the sacred weirwood trees. And it was these sacred weirwood trees that was the closest thing to a shrine in the religion. Now, these trees with carved faces are known as heart trees. These are very special trees. They're usually in the centre of a god's wood, and these are their shrine, as I said. And one of the most notable things about them is they can have expressive faces with different facial expressions, and when the faces are carved, red sap leaks out from the deep cuts, and it gives the eyes the appearance that they're weeping blood. It's been said that the children of the forest have ruled over Westeros for thousands of years before the arrival of the first humans. They inhabited vast, primeval forests that spanned most of Westeros, and their lives and their culture was never at risk and had never been under threat. But that was all to change. It was in 12,000 BAL that everything changed for the children. It was this time that the first men arrived in Westeros, and with it came a big culture shock. They came in large numbers, riding their horses. Now, the first men, they came from the east, and they travelled from Essos across the Arm of Dorne. Now, this is just an example of how they travelled across. Now, when they came, it was a culture shock, because they rode horses. They had bronze swords and leather shields, and in armour, and the children had never seen anything like this. But more importantly, and more drastically, they were larger and they were stronger. As soon as they entered Westeros, they began to cut out holdfasts, and in doing so, they began to encroach on the children of the forest, and this caused all-out war. The First Men were merciless in their war against the children. They chopped down large portions of their forests, concentrating on their heart trees because they could see their significance to the children. This lasted for roughly 2,000 years, and in that time, a lot of the children of the forest were killed, and large portions of their forest were desecrated. This was a lot of blood spilled. It was at this point that the children realised they weren't on the winning side. They couldn't fight against the First Men. So they turned to their green seers, their wise men, who used their powers to bring forth this almighty storm and this magic power to attack the Arm of Dorne. Now, the Arm of Dorne was a land bridge, and they decided if we break this, shatter this, that they'll no longer be able to come, which was true, but unfortunately when they created the broken Arm of Dorne, it was a bit like closing the stable door after the horses have bolted. The First Men were already here, they had already colonised the south, and they were already moving north, so the only recourse that the children had was to try and do this again, but at an even greater scale. They decided to break Westeros from the north and the south in half, and this was to happen at the neck. And so they brought a stronger version of what they did in Dorne, and they used the Hammer of the Waters to try and break the neck. Instead, all they ended up doing was causing a big influx of water to flood the neck, and it became very swampy. Now this, although a failure, actually was a success in the long run, because the First Men realised that this was a bit much, this was a show of power that they respected, and they decided, we're not going to fight anymore, and that is what brought forth the Pact. After nearly 2,000 years, the First Men and the children had decided that enough was enough, and they took their representatives from each race, and they met on an island in the God's Eye, which was a massive lake in the middle of Westeros, in an area we now know as the Riverlands. Decided to broker peace on this island called the Isle of Faces. The representatives agreed that the open land, field, shore, hill and mountain would be the domain of the First Men, while the deep forest would remain undisturbed under the domain of the children. It was there that they decided that no more weirwood trees would be chopped down, and to commemorate it, all the weirwood trees on the island were carved with a face. And this is what gave the island its name. And it's these carving of faces in the trees that were said to be the faces that observed the pact being signed between the two races. And so it was, in 10,000 BAL, with the forging of the pact between the children of the forest and the First Men, that the Dawn Age came to a close. It was in this newly created time of peace, where the children of the forest and the First Men coexisted, that the First Men themselves actually adopted the religion of the children of the forest and began to worship the old gods. And this would continue, particularly in the north, where they held true to this. Oaths would take place in front of the sacred heart trees, and as you can see, the Night's Watch to this day still take their oath underneath or in the presence of the heart trees. And as the First Men built their own kingdoms and their own castles, within their grounds they would always have a god's wood, a collection of trees with a heart tree at its centre, a place where they could find solace, and also it was where they worshipped the old gods. They are a place of solitude and prayer, and many a marriage is performed in front of these trees because the oaths of marriage or the oath of taking the black is perceived to be binding in front of these trees. And there you have it, the Dawn Age of Westeros. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more in this Game of Thrones history series, get behind the channel and subscribe and like, and of course I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below, and if we get enough support we'll be able to go on to the next era in history, the Age of Heroes.